The Elbaf locals have emphasized the sun god taking on several forms: the Liberator, the Destroyer, the etc. Not familiar with that third one. So it's not out of the question that Loki has another model of the Nika fruit. So that is one of the most interesting things that I have heard in the past 45 minutes, and we are going to discuss it. Elbaf was said to possess a legendary devil fruit, one that gets passed down the royal line, but not necessarily consumed by the royal line, as it does not appear that Harold ate it, and it seems more likely that the fruit is being purposely kept and saved until a certain appointed time. And this fruit is assumed to be a sun god devil fruit. Quite controversial because we already have one of those. That's the implication that Rox made to child Loki anyway. When Loki claimed that Rox could be Nika, Rox said, "Nah mate, that's your dad maybe." And Loki himself has also claimed to be the sun god. And it has been stated that Loki ate the legendary devil fruit on the day that Harold died, and in fact it is commonly believed that Loki killed Harold in order to consume said fruit. Commonly believed by the characters in world, not by the readers. We're much more clever. And in fact, at the moment, we're not even 100% certain that Loki did eat the devil fruit. He was restrained using giant sea stone chains, and it does seem likely, but also it would be the most One Piece thing in the world for this to be a bait and switch and to have a heartfelt moment of Loki pretending to be restrained or some other crap along those lines. But the simplest solution at the moment is that Loki did indeed eat the fruit. But one of the questions we do have comes from chapter 1152, where we do actually see the chest containing the legendary devil fruit being encroached upon by an as of yet unidentified figure, with our best guess for this at the moment being a Holy Knight. But here's where things get confusing though, because this branches off into another theory. The idea here is that this Holy Knight successfully absconded with the fruit, and it ended up in the possession of the world government, being transported by Cypherpole at the time that Who's Who was a member, and that this is the fruit that Shanks and his crew stole, and that Luffy proceeded to accidentally on purpose eat, and now that is why he is awakening the sun god powers. That's one idea, that this legendary devil fruit of Elbaf was Luffy's fruit. And that may also explain why we haven't seen any Nika awakening since the days of the Void Century, because this fruit would have been kept securely until fate deemed it time to release it into the wild. And I think there is something to this through the Shanks connection as well. He's pretty heavily involved in Elbaf. In fact, he was even on the island the day that Harold was killed by the looks of it. Here you can see him in the home of Scopogaban, with Ripley looking at his tiny human penis whilst Harold was being impaled in Orist Castle. And so Shanks could have pursued the fruit after this incident, ending up in East Blue, or we could be very much overcomplicating things here, which I think is fair because we do have a literal sun god fruit in Monkey D. Luffy's possession. However, solution number the second is that this mysterious figure was about to obtain the legendary devil fruit of Elbaf, but was stopped by Loki, who consumed the fruit to protect it, and he was also granted what he believes to be sun god powers. So can both things be true? Could there be two sun god fruits that differ in their functionality and intent? Very possibly. This leans heavily on the Vegapunk hypothesis of devil fruit creation, but if we can't trust the conclusion of the smartest man in the world, then we cannot trust anything. His idea was that every devil fruit was the result of a dream of humanity and a possible path of evolution for the human race. And when it comes to the sun god Nika, there are two possible paths forward, those being liberation and destruction. Now, I've made many videos in the past pointing out that the two of these things are not mutually exclusive ideas. Luffy's acts of liberation do tend to involve quite a lot of destruction. We're talking entire islands worth of destruction sometimes. And so Luffy strikes me as a liberation via destruction kind of sun god. But could you also have an incarnation of Nika that works the other way around? A destruction via liberation kind of dude guy, representing different opposing dreams for humanity, but still using the Nika mythology as a basis. Seems a bit lazy initially, why have two fruits that are kind of the same thing but not, but that's just a standard in One Piece. Not all devil fruits are completely unique, and it's not even particularly uncommon for two fruits to be the result of similar but slightly different dreams. Your classic example of this is Miss Valentine's Kilo fruit versus the Ton fruit of Mark of Ice. Similar dreams, but one person decided to dream significantly bigger than the other. Officially, Monet's snow fruit and Kuzan's ice fruit fall into this category as well, as identified by Oda. And even Katakuri's Mochi Mochi no Mi ended up being weirdly similar to the base functionality of Luffy's devil fruit. That's not quite what we're looking at here though, at least I don't think so. Because those are all examples of devil fruits that have the same, or not the same, but a very similar purpose. Like they're going down the same path but wearing different shoes. Whereas what would be happening here with the second Nika fruit is an oppositional pair, which we also have examples of with Blackbeard's Darkness Devil Fruit and Kizaru's Light Logia. Those two are opposing forces. And to bring Kuzan back into things, he and Ace's Devil Fruits were opposing forces as well, as they cancelled each other out. However, Sakazuki's Devil Fruit, the Oda identified superior to Ace's, did manage to beat Kuzan. But here is the crack theory, right? Long ago, when devil fruits were being conjured into this world, there were two people of opposing ideals. Let's even go ahead and give them names, like say Davy Jones and Joy Boy. Both were individuals that had a particular dream for the future, and those dreams weren't completely out of line with one another. They both wanted to get to roughly the same place, but through wildly different methods. And so their desires became two different incarnations of the same idea, the Liberator and the Destroyer. And perhaps Loki, having maybe inherited the will of Rocks and I guess the will of Davy, is not lying when he claimed to be the sun god and the man who will bring the world to an end. We know the world's coming to an end, some man's gonna do it. But the only thing I would say that this risks conflicting with is Blackbeard's role. You would think that if anyone was going to inherit the will of Davy, then it would be him, and he does already have a dark fruit, which could be argued directly opposes the sun god fruit. And I'm all down for either one of them being a scarier, twisted destroyer take on Nika, as it reminds me a bit of Gunko and how she stated that Nika is her worst nightmare. And at the time you'd think, yes, Gunko, Liberation is probably the worst nightmare of a filthy oppressor, given her status. But then again, this could be the actual Gunko speaking. There are parts of her persona that do remain, which is why she listens to Brook's music, and perhaps there is a legitimate reason out there to be afraid of Nika. And Gunko comes from a background that experienced the Destroyer rather than the Liberator. And if Loki did happen to possess the powers of a god of destruction, then I think that that would be one of the most terrifying things that we've ever seen. Remembering that this would be a mythical Zoan, but really it's just the Zoan part that's important in this, as Zoan fruits have lives and personalities of their own, and if a user isn't careful, that personality goes on to supersede their own, which is something that we're even somewhat seeing happen with Luffy in Gear 5th. He's having a lot of fun, but he's not quite himself in that form. He's always on a sun god high. But now imagine if your devil fruit power wasn't a rubber hose cartoon troll, and was instead an actual god of destruction salivating for said destruction. Loki may not have been playing the villain at all when it took all of the giants of Elbaf to bring him down. Instead, he may have briefly lost himself to the god of destruction, and if so, then freeing him is a legitimate danger for all involved, even Emu and the Holy Knights. I suppose we'll find out quickly enough though, because this is the only conclusion of Luffy being who he is. Liberator's gonna liberate, you know? Even if it means liberating the Destroyer. Man on the internet, I think you should make a video about how Big Mom was right about how if Lola married Loki, she would have been king of the pirates, and how we all overlooked those words she spoke to Nami and Luffy. So the most recent flashback has definitely put Big Mom's previous words and even actions into a very different context. Her whole thing was about wanting to forge world peace extremely forcefully by incorporating every race in the world into her family, but Charlotte Linland's fixation was always on those giants. She even stated that if Lola had gotten married, oh, the power I'd have gained. And this is fun because the assumption here was that Linland was talking about an alliance with the Elbaf army, and that with that legion of giants on her side, she would steamroll everyone else through raw power, which made sense because she was also funneling money to Caesar Clown to create giants. And so this all came down to raw power maths, but as it turns out, that may not have been what she was talking about at all. Because Rocksteady Zebek gave each member of his crew the formula for world domination. That formula is Harold plus legendary fruit plus another fruit plus GLR giants equals the toppling of the Holy Land of Marijois. Rox repeatedly emphasized that Elbaf was the key. So Big Mom's not just thinking of the raw punch power. What Lola cost her was the devil fruit and the man capable of using it. And my assumption is that Harold was dead by the time that Loki proposed to Lola. I might be wrong about this, but Harold died 14 years ago and Lola would have only been 12 at the time. Not that child proposals are unprecedented in One Piece, with Vanderdecken proposing to a 6-year-old Shirahoshi. I'm not sure though, because you would think it was while Harold was alive, because after that point no one's really followed following Loki because they all think he killed Harold. But from what we saw of Lola when she set out to sea, she was very adult. So whichever way it turns out, the point is that Big Mom would have either wanted Harold or saw Loki as the new Harold. A man who could eat the fruit, wield that fruit, and combined with the power of a large maternal figure, who probably thought of herself as a Rock's level partner, together they could rule the world. And with that in mind, it is a bit easier to understand why Big Mom is always so angry whenever Lola or the Giants are brought up, because from her perspective, there are not multiple paths to world domination. Rox had this one plan and he was pretty adamant that this was the only way. And so it seems like fate has conspired pretty heavily to block Big Mom specifically off from ever being able to implement the Rock's formula. And with Loki's focus on destroying the world, who knows? Maybe he and Charlotte and Lin actually would have been a real good team. The CP0 members on Wano were playing Reversi when they were waiting for orders. Foreshadowing? So I've had a lot of comments like this. I know the games do look similar, but the CP0 agents were actually playing Go, not Reversi or Othello. The main difference between the two games is that Reversi or Othello is about flipping your opponent's pieces, whilst Go is fundamentally a game about drawing borders and controlling territory with no piece flipping at all. Go is actually a game that's very world government coded though. Several people have also pointed out that this is what Garp and Kobe were playing in the One Piece live action. Should say those people didn't say Go, most of them also thought it was Reversi, and that the live action had some sort of Oda-granted insight into the future events. But Go is a game where you seek to control as much of the in-game world as possible. And I think some of the confusion might come from the perception that CP0 were flipping pieces from black to white during the raid on Onigashima, but unless that was something that was happening in the anime that I missed, I believe they were just replacing the black pieces with white pieces. And it should be said that they weren't actually playing Go, they were just using it as a fun illustrative tool, and if you know the rules of Go, then it's quite informative in every given situation it's shown in. This setup, for example, shows the white pieces being completely surrounded by black, meaning that black controls all of the territory on the board, and that the white pieces have been captured and they have no chance at all in the game. At this stage, the game is already over. That's where we began. And I do think that this game metaphor was very deliberate by Oda, because CP0 are agents of the world nobles, so of course they also turn their missions into games as well. It's just how they're taught to think about the world. Dear Internet Man, what's the chances of Roger's divine departure, that was also used by Shanks, will be the answer to Imu and Domi Reversi? So I do like where this thinking is going, but unfortunately we did already see this play out. Roger initially used divine departure in the big group attack, and Imu was able to regenerate from it with no issues at all. But I do like where your head is at, because we can't ignore the overt mentions to concepts like divinity, because they are becoming very important and very tangible these days. And think about it this way, someone taught Roger divine departure, most likely anyway, and he taught it to Shanks. So perhaps divine departure is another remnant of the Void Century, a move that has been passed down like the Straw Hat and like Binks Sake, and originally it may have had some actual holy damage behind it. Although right now I think it does serve as a good dichotomy of Shanks. Shanks was born into a family of world nobles, people who proclaim themselves to be divine gods, but Shanks was only taught true divinity from his pirate dad, and is now more of an actual Holy Knight than any of those frauds on Marijois. Wouldn't it be interesting though if the Holy Knights actually existed during the Void Century, but they served a purpose of general good, and Imu took that concept and corrupted it for himself. Kaido's perspective on a good death hits a little harder now that we know how Rox died. Maybe Kaido wanted to die in glorious battle because he knows what happened to his former captain. So Kaido did famously say that Roger and Whitebeard did it right, the did it being death, but Kaido never brought up Rox. And I get it from Kaido's perspective, this was not the way to go out. Kaido's POV is that Rox betrayed his crew, was promptly beaten, and slowly and quietly sank into the abyss of obscurity, but also the literal abyss of the ocean. Kaido's also tried to end his life many times in the series, so much so that people often ask, well, why doesn't he just chuck himself into the sea? That seems like a pretty simple way to make it work as a fruit user, but after knowing what happened to Rox, that is just not the way that Kaido's gonna want to go. It has to be something extravagant, like jumping off a sky island. That is memorable, whereas history isn't gonna mark your name if your cause of death was actually going in a bit too deep while bathing one day. Man on the internet takes any opportunity to shoehorn Bonnie into every video just because she's Australian. So this is referring to the real-world nationalities that Oda gave a ton of his characters. And you're damn right I'm going to take this opportunity as well, because Bonnie, she's all we got. Well, not all. In theory, we also have Mina Koala, who I'm assuming is Australian and part Australian. And also that one zombie from Thriller Bark who was part kangaroo but mostly zebra in a bow tie. That's what we got as Australians to be proud of. So Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. I hope we get cover stories of the other Rocks members who would eventually end up in Moria's army and see how they met their tragic fates. That is a fantastic idea for a cover story. I love it. And that's a problem, because if it doesn't happen now, I'm going to be disappointed. It could work out really well though. I'm envisioning something like the Straw Hat Grand Fleet cover story where we spend 4 to 5 pages with each character of interest and we track the journeys of the less relevant Rocks pirates like Captain John, Garnsey, Silveraxe, Barbell, and maybe even some good old Gloriosa. And we do have some precedent for this. Generally, cover stories, they're designed to showcase tandem events in the modern timeline. So while the Straw Hats are over here, here's what someone over here is doing. But a lot of the Germa 66 cover story ended up being an excuse for a backdoor Vegapunk flashback. So I am 100% down for a Rocks Pirates cover story. Because after the Yamato cover story, I think we need something of substance. The moon imagery in the drawing Oda made of Child Teach hits a lot harder considering who killed his father. So this is the moon imagery in question. For quite some time, this was the only hint we had for Blackbeard's past, and that hint was, well, it wasn't a very good time for him. That hint has since turned out to be true. It was not a good time for him, and I don't know if Oda intended this, but this drawing, it is indeed quite cruel in retrospect. You've got Blackbeard crying here, and the only thing he has for company is this prick of a crescent moon beaming down upon him, like Figaland Garling constantly mocking Teach for being able to snipe a kill on that 1 HP Rocks, and also more tragedy. One of the more adorable aspects of the God Valley flashback was, of course, baby Shanks. This little dude spent most of the incident blissfully asleep, dreaming of who knows what. I just know that it was a lot better than what was actually happening. And directly contrasting him, you have little Teach, who was wide awake, seeing all of the atrocities, and it is very possible that after this day, Teach was never able to fall asleep again.